What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Movement Mindset powered by Station Athletics. I'm Chris Hardenberg here with Joe Passalacqua, episode number 21. And today we're going to be talking about how to train if you are a master's athlete.
A little bit of a variation on that. This isn't going to be strictly about training for competition, but the concept of gauging how you scale things differently based on your age, based on whatever the outcome is that you
Yeah.
want to.
So when we put out the question of what do you guys want to hear, this was one of the first suggestions we got. So shout out to Nick Volpe who put that out there. For those of you that don't know Nick,
Nick's a dick.
He's super old. So this is very pertinent and important for Nick and all you old people to know. So a couple main points, and then we can kind of go into each one. Okay. So just for you guys to remember, a couple of things we're going to touch on is managing volume and intensity. Recovery and mobility is just as important as training. Accessory work is just as important as training. Avoiding high inflammatory foods and listening to your body. So those are the broad concepts we're going to be going over. So first one let's touch on, Joe, is obviously managing volume and intensity. So what does that kind of look like, and what does that mean for you? For someone who's a master's athlete?
Absolutely, right? So I'm 36. We're like in that master's age. You're going to be there next year.
We're very close.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the fun zone. It's just as difficult.
In some ways more difficult.
Yeah, actually more difficult. So the reason we want to talk about this, and we're glad that Nick kind of brought this up, is based on being 25 or 35, let's talk first about being a competitive athlete in like the CrossFit space.
Sure.
Right. When you are aging into that realm, what happens is your volume when you're 25 can be here.
Yeah.
Okay. Your recovery time doesn't necessarily need to max it. And you kind of flip flop into this direction, right? To where your quality of your work is more important and your recovery is even more important. And understanding your body, actually taking rest days, right, is a big, big thing. I remember when we were training for like semifinals or regionals or like that level, right? The concept was even on our off days, we were doing skill work.
Yeah.
It wasn't really, and then we'd run 3 miles,
Right.
right? So like that was rest.
Yeah.
Right. It was very rare that we were off. Now we were just talking about this. I did the Asbury Park Games a couple weeks ago. And what I noticed is as I'm competing, we competed in the regular division. So I was competing with 25-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
I was probably me and Alex are probably the oldest two.
You guys probably were the oldest guys.
Right. We're both 36. And what I noticed was my volume is not even close to what it used to be, but my efficiency and my quality is still really, really high. So I'm still able to compete at a really, really high level.
Sure.
I'm sore as fuck after 2 days of working out.
Yeah.
But I can still do everything that I need to do. I can still lift at 90% effectively pretty much all the time. And my capacity and my sprint work are still really, really strong. So why I'm talking about this is because when we look at scalability in class, I've been dealing with a wrist injury. We just talked about this.
Yeah.
And if instead of not doing the work at the heavy weight, I'm going to do it lighter.
Yeah.
Right. My knees are bothering me. I may not squat that day.
Yeah.
Okay. Or for instance, we just talked about, let's use Jeremy, one of our members. He's one of our high level members.
Masters members.
Masters members. He's approaching 50 years old, or he is 50.
I think he might be 50.
He's old.
Yeah.
Jeremy, you old.
No, he's definitely 50.
Yeah, you old, Jeremy. You're 50. So Jeremy will work, and in our gyms, we have scaled RX and CRX.
Yeah.
Okay. Our CRX level is a competitive level. Okay. And we have that for the perspective of just because you do RX, and let's just say it's 135, that doesn't mean that if you go to a competition, that's what the weight's going to be. That might be the scaled weight.
Right.
But if you're going to be competitive, the CRX number is that number.
Right.
So it may be 155.
Sure.
Okay. But when you're looking at older athletes, okay, sometimes you and me don't do CRX.
Right.
Because of the example of, is this going to cripple me if I do this weight? Are you capable? Yes. So backtracking to Jeremy. Jeremy, a lot of the times will come to me and say, I'll be like, Jer, don't do 135 on this movement.
Yeah.
Your 50, your CRX would really be 115. And then that's what he'll do.
Right.
Okay. So it's understanding the conceptual piece of volume, what your body can handle, and really how you recover on an individual basis.
Yeah. And that's really so important. Like you mentioned, when you're younger, you can train, I know a lot of people who are, we were in that boat. You're training sometimes twice a day, high volume, high intensity, right? And when you get older, the volume or the number of sessions, the number of reps that you do, especially in certain movement patterns. So like maybe when I was telling Brandon before we got on, like when I was competing, because I'm not a good squatter, I was squatting you
every day,
like 2-3 times a week. Now it's like, I can't do that. Right. Because that was probably 4 or 5 years ago.
You have time restraint. your body
Right.
is a restraining factor now,
Yeah.
right?
And so you have to keep an eye on those movement patterns and pull that volume back. And then the big thing is like what I would say is undulate your intensity. So what I mean by that is like, let's use Marquand as an example. So like let's say 3 years ago, Monday super hard. Tuesday super hard. But it's like the movement patterns change. So that's how a guy at that level can keep
Your
things.
hands aren't always beaten up because
Yes.
you're doing gymnastics on one hard day and not back to
Yes.
back.
But if you're a master's athlete, let's say you feel really good. So I'll use another example. I'll use you as an example. There was a couple months ago, Joe and I were working out in class and we had a max front squat. He felt really good. So he had a massive number, right? For a lot of master's athletes, especially as you get out of your 30s into your 40s, like you might have one day you feel really good and push the envelope. The next day, you should probably go easier because your body and your central nervous system is not going to recover like it would at 25.
Yeah.
So it's like you need to then bring the intensity down, bring the volume down so you can still train, but have an easier day so that your body can recover.
And you'll still progress though.
Yes.
Right? I had a college coach. He was actually my decathlon coach. And his name was Nate.
Okay.
And he used to always say to me, Joe, you do too much volume, too much volume, too much volume. I used to get hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Hamstring tears, hip issues, right?
Yeah.
It's like little nagging things. But I was really adamant about my recovery. So I ended up being able to still progress. But he used to always hype to me, decrease your volume. It's all about quality, quality, quality. I have a training partner, Ross, who I went to college with, who also did decathlon. Ross followed that.
Yeah.
I was what we would refer to as a high capacity and high volume style athlete. Ross was not a high volume, high capacity athlete. And he progressed very, very well in everything because his quality was so spot on.
Yeah.
I could handle more volume. He couldn't. Doesn't necessarily mean that the volume is going to make you better.
Right.
Right.
And that's the thing is like using CrossFit or even Spartan races or high rocks, like you need to have a certain level of volume to compete. But once you get into these masters levels, you still need a certain volume and intensity to compete. But that number or that, theoretical number continues to drop just because the body can't recover.
And it's consistency. So let's use Nick as an example,
Yeah.
right? So Nick, we've known Nick for about 9 years,
Sure.
roughly. Nick works out at Sparta, and Nick has been consistently in really good shape since the day I met him.
Yeah.
Okay. He's progressed a lot when he started training with us
Mhm.
because it's all about, the atmosphere and
Yeah.
some other things too. But Nick continued to progress because Nick is consistent with his diet, consistent with his education of body mechanics,
Yeah.
of recovery, and his strength training is continuous. But if Nick doesn't put himself in bad positions, it's typically why Nick doesn't hurt himself in the act of fitness. He
Yeah.
hurts himself doing other stuff. But but this is why he's continuously able to progress. And he's 43-ish now.
Yeah.
So but he's still improving.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us to the next thing. So if you're a master's athlete, you obviously need to manage your volume and intensity, making sure if you have a really hard day, the next day is a little bit easier, maybe a more skill-based day. But the other thing that's big is recovery. And so I heard I think it was a podcast, it might have been like a Ben Bergeron podcast that he recommends that his athletes do 15 minutes of recovery work. So soft tissue work, stretching for every hour that they train. So if you're training 3 hours, theoretically, you should be doing 45 minutes of recovery work that day. For a master's athlete, that is hardcore, a bare minimum. If you're going to train hard as someone who's a master's athlete and you're looking to compete, whether it's triathlon, Spartan races, CrossFit, doesn't matter. If you're going to train for an hour, you need to be doing some sort of recovery work for at least 15 minutes, stretching, soft tissue, foam rolling, so that your muscles can continue to recover and you can continue to train. Right.
And that's why sometimes I won't go as heavy because I have a hesitation of I'm not going to push the envelope because I don't feel comfortable.
Well, you can also feel it. You know what I mean? Like if your hips and knees feel tight, then it's like, okay, hey, I got to pull back a little bit today. And we'll kind of go over that a little bit more at the end when it comes to listening to your body, but making sure that you hit that recovery work. And the next thing we talked about is accessory work. So Joe and I are completely biased, but in our classes, there's often 1 or 2 days a week at least that there's some sort of accessory work built into the program.
That was always been the expectation on programming for me.
Yeah.
I always said I always wanted the class structure to be, okay, we have a basic warm up and the coaches are free reign to do what they feel fit. It's typically around whatever it is the class schedule is, right? And then we have our strength or a longer conditioning piece, or a strength, shorter conditioning piece, and then some sort of what I would refer to as a finisher or midline
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
typically, right?
Yeah, and again, for people who are actively competing, you might be taking class, you might not. Like we actually have a woman, this is going to come out after the fact, but at our Roseland location that's competing at the Masters games this
Yeah.
weekend, right? And so she has her own programming. She does a lot of accessory work. She has a knee issue that flares up from time to time. And so why accessory work or single leg and single arm work is super important is because as you get older, you need to make sure you're building strength in certain muscle groups to make sure you don't develop any imbalances. You're making sure your small muscle groups remain strong. Like, could you imagine being 40 years old and hammering snatches and never doing a crossover symmetry or YTW to strengthen your rotator cuff?
Rotator cuff's gonna explode.
Yeah, and so it's like you have to maintain those things to maintain a high level of training. And then the other thing we talked about, and you've touched on it, is avoiding your diet. And so there are some foods that can trigger inflammation, right? So as you get older, and I know this has happened to me, but for those of you that don't know, Joe loves pizza.
Oh, I love it.
And so, but I'm sure you felt it. Like if you were to go smash half a pie, like your training session is not going to feel as good.
No, of course. It's like the other day with the lobster rolls. Oh my God. I will laugh at this. So there's a lobster truck. It's called Cousins Lobster. If you've seen it, it's on it was on Shark Tank.
Okay.
And it comes to Sparta Dairy like once a month. And I was driving down the road to like from the bank and I'm like, oh my God, the truck's there. So I fucking call Chris.
Just whip it around.
No. I call Chris and I go, Kristen, I got too much to do right now. I need you to go get lobster rolls and lobster tater tots. So she goes and gets this food, and I annihilate it before the 3 o'clock class, or the 3:30 class. And I felt so horrible. I thought I was gonna throw up while we were front squatting. It was disgusting. But my point to you is, like, there's if you eat properly on a regular basis leading into your fitness or around it, your results gonna be a lot higher.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, whereas when we were younger, maybe that one session after eating that way doesn't feel great, but then the next day it's like whatever, it's out of your system.
Yeah.
Like for me, if I eat poorly for a couple days, like my knees hurt
Yeah, they do.
going to squat 3
Yeah.
days, 3 days
So you and me
later.
just talked about this. A lot of people, if you educate yourself on food, and this is why I'm talking about this. So when I was in college, if people know the name Brian Clay, he was one of the greatest decathletes
Okay.
of all time, gold medalist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Brian held the world record for a while too. It was, this is how nice this guy was. I would message him on Facebook.
Yeah.
And he would answer my questions. This
Oh
guy.
really?
Nicest guy ever. Similar body build, me and him. So it was very compatible because he was a shorter decathlete. Most decathletes are over like 6'2",
Okay.
very competitive ones. And he was about my height, about 5'11".
Okay.
Right? So something that he told me to try was, he goes, hey, I struggle with recovery. This is what my schedule has been. And he would review it for me. And he goes, hey, instead of taking so much ibuprofen, try drinking cherry juice. And he sent me an article on the inflammatory effect of how it fights, how cherry juice fights like inflammation in your body. Because as a decathlete, if you know, it's a lot of bounding and jumping. So my knees were constantly hurting.
Yeah.
Right? So I started doing that literally in college.
Yeah.
And then when I came into this sport, 14 years ago now, right? Conceptually, I kept doing it. And every time I feel like my body hurts, I'll double down on how much tart cherry juice that I'm drinking.
Yeah.
And within 3 or 4 days, I feel significantly better.
Yeah. Well, because you've cleaned up what's going to handle the take on that inflammation. It's like same thing on the other side. I bet if you're a master's athlete and you have achy joints, I bet you if you go back and your training's been sound or whatever, but if you go back and look at what you ate, it probably hasn't been great. And so cleaning that up, implementing things like for you it was the cherry juice or certain supplements to pull back on the inflammation.
It's just consistently, right? Like I'm a huge fish oil advocate.
Yeah.
There's a lot of science behind it about how it helps keep your joints healthy, right?
Yeah.
Like there's certain things, if you do it consistently, like I've been taking X Endurance, zinc and magnesium. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Right. And I've been taking it for years and years. And when I take it consistently, I feel significantly better.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing is, it's like continually educate yourself on nutrition and the things you're putting in your body, but also know like, oh, my body doesn't feel right because I fucking ate fast food 3 days ago.
Yes. And then that segues into our last point. If you are in that role, and it doesn't have to be the main reason why you're in that position, but it could be one of the reasons why you're in the position, is then listening to your body. And this is something I'll speak for myself. Like when I was younger was notoriously bad at. Like I was really good. So I come from a wrestling background. And for those of you that don't know, it's a pretty intense sport. Weight cutting and like
I mean, if it's probably one of the hardest athletic things on the face of the planet.
So I spent 15 years trying to get good at telling my body like basically to be quiet and like we're just gonna cut weight and hammer this workout anyways. You just deal with it. Coming out of that and becoming an adult, it's like, okay, well, this doesn't quite work that way. And then things flare up. And so that was a skill I had to develop of like, okay, what's the line of I'm sore and can still move versus, I'm beat up and need to tailor and change the workouts. And you touched on that a little bit where it's like, okay, my wrist was bothering me. For me, muscle soreness is one thing, but anytime it creeps into your joints, an adjustment absolutely has to be made.
Oh, it has to.
Because your joints don't recover like your muscles do. And so if you have an achy joint,
it takes you 9 months.
Exactly.
10 months. Yeah.
And so it's okay, especially as a master's athlete, if you want to progress, you have to be able to get really good at saying, this joint hurts, or I didn't sleep great the night before, because master's athletes have real jobs with real stress, real things to worry about. Some of them are paying for their kids to go to college and they're trying to figure out how they're going to come up with that money, right? So being able to say like, all right, I don't have it today. Here's some of the things I could do that's not going to beat my body up to get better, and then see how I feel the next day. Like that is, I know it's like a loose thing, but it's something you and I talk about a lot. But being able to be good at that is really one of the biggest things that's going to help you to progress.
So, and I guess like we'll kind of end on this. The reason why that I feel like this was a really strong subject, and I know you'll agree with me on, is we live this.
Yeah.
So we've been competitive in this sport for many, many years. I still dabble in it here and there, right? And the perspective is I can still compete at a high level because I consistently, over X amount of years, still follow these things on a regular basis. I find time for the fitness. I find time, the best of my ability, to try and eat as proper as possible.
Right.
I understand macronutrients. I understand protein intake. I know that, hey, I didn't eat enough today. Tomorrow I'm going to feel like shit.
Yeah.
Okay. And
it is what it is.
But I acknowledge it to myself.
Yeah.
Right. So it's understanding those things. So when Nick brought this up about being a master's athlete, what I really wanted to explain is whether you want to compete or you don't want to compete, it's understanding how you scale things, but owning the decision of, I ate bad for 3 days. I binge drank this weekend way too much. This is why I feel like shit.
Yeah.
I got hurt not because of the class, because I didn't take care of myself for the last 3 days.
Yes.
Right. It's understanding conceptually that piece of it and then just correcting the errors.
Yeah. And managing the risk versus the reward of all that. So yeah, guys, if you're someone who's a master's athlete, again, it doesn't really matter on the realm you're looking to do, but if you're a master's athlete or even someone in our class who is maybe 35 or 40 plus, being able to know these things and work within these frameworks is going to be really helpful to make sure you continue to progress. So yeah, keep up the good work in class, guys. As always, like and subscribe to us on YouTube, Instagram, and give us a 5-star review on all podcast platforms. And we'll see you at the gym.
Peace.